From Auckland to Anaheim. From Dublin to Detroit. To your next event. Let's meet Norm Rebin.
The other thing I do, I think, is to really practice the art of oratory. I've been speaking for half a century. I hope I look younger than that statement implies. But from the time I was 3 years old, I was on the platform. And I learned to speak because our tradition was an oral tradition. And I believe that I was taught early that oratory is one step beyond speech. And I have always attempted to practice that. And many meeting planners and many audience members have given me that ultimate compliment.
Rebin is one of the most fascinating speakers I've ever heard. He's an orator, and he's a motivator. He does some things that are a bit different than other speakers. He really tries to get to know the audience, to get a sense of who they are, the kinds of things that will interest them. He tends to engage them. What will be meaningful? He tends to talk about them. He tends to really be able to relate to them, and they can relate to him. This is very motivating for people. And people usually leave his speeches on a high. Norm is one of the best speakers I've ever heard, and I would highly recommend him as a
and a new reality. And the global perspective now is the only way to do business. The only way to do business. And can we learn from each other? What could a country of only 7 million people teach us, for example, like Sweden, which incidentally has risen dramatically, I understand, to almost 7.5 million now in the last 30 years? Well, if you attended a conference there like I did a little while ago, you'd learn that they have now banished corporal punishment from their curriculum. It's now impossible for a parent to chastise his son or daughter physically without being subject to civil or criminal prosecution. What else can they teach us? They can teach us that, in fact, in the last 3 years, they've established 20,000 new businesses of 25 people or less, which has now accommodated almost all their unemployment program. What else can they teach us? They teach us how government and management and labor and the private sector entrepreneur can work together to capture the major bulk of the pulp and paper industry, which once belonged to my own country, Canada. It means, in fact, that we ought to be having them in our programs, and we ought to be having their counterparts in Denmark and in Finland on our programs, and we ought to be able to network with them so that when we bring to our clients services, it is truly based on this information and knowledge explosion that we talk about. We keep talking about this being the age not of the industrial explosion, but of the information explosion, and yet we reduce sometimes our thinking to the narrow confines of our own border. And therefore it isn't terribly, terribly necessary that we must not only see the vision, but execute it.
As someone who makes their living planning meetings and booking seminars and dealing with speakers, it's always a treat for me to deal with Norm Rebin. I booked Norm on several occasions, and he has never once disappointed me. He's an exemplary speaker, has wonderful oratorial skills, and his material is always fresh. I find that Norm's material is cutting edge, and one of the things I appreciate most about Norm is that ego doesn't get in the way. Norm communicates very well with me. He always knows what is expected of him, and his audiences track very well with Norm. Although Norm is a very well qualified individual, I've never once seen him speak down to an audience. He relates to them so well it's hard to believe.
Norm is a visionary who acts on his ideals. In other words, he puts his money where his mouth is, and therefore is able to speak with absolute authority and integrity. He is the only speaker I know of who can instantly and totally alter the mood and atmosphere of a meeting, convention,
Talk about what I heard here.
Or workshop.
So a lot of my comments are going to be off the cuff, but I hope very germane and very relative to what you're talking about. I heard about open communication, candid communication, taking a risk, really sharing with one another. And then the question always comes about, that's always been said. Do you realize that every corporation I talk to and have the opportunity of sharing with says the same thing? We ought to have better communication, up the ladder, down the ladder, laterally. How do you get better communication? That's the key question. Not should we have it. There isn't a person on earth that doesn't believe in better communication. Networking. That's the example of internationalism.
A lot of our people say, well, we aren't going to get R&D for the future. The governments don't have money anymore for R&D. Even private groups don't have money for R&D. In order for us to really tap into this value-added market, where are we going to get the dollars? Well, I could give you the answer to that.
I travel a lot in my work, and I've had the privilege of seeing him speak in a number of countries. Difficult situations with respect to cultural differences and language differences. Norm breaks through them all. His ability to bring an audience together, a group together, a seminar leader, he's been able to bring them together, people who have diverging opinions. He has the exceptional capacity to make everybody work together as a one cohesive unit.
The truth of the matter is I rehearse all the time, and I rehearse because I know that each audience is different, and each is customized and tailored. And one of the ways I can customize and tailor is by hearing myself and replaying it, which is why I ask for a gratis tape each time you tape me in front of an audience so I can replay it. And let me tell you something. I am far more discriminatingly critical of me than you are, because I watch for every nuance which I thought missed the boat with you people when I do that video replay. Which means to me, in fact, that that is the second tool in this age of flight to the moon, in this supersonic age of accelerated technology. And we all know the story. It took 50 years from the invention of the telephone to its practical use, 15 from the invention of radar to its practical use, 3 years from the invention of the solar cell to its practical use, and today we have instant obsolescence. Well, if that's true, and we have such accelerated technology, how is it then that we're not using the most advanced tool in the world?
From heart and humor, from inspiration and innovation, from creativity and compassion, from anecdotes to action. I like to be able to think that I wring and wrench every single emotion out of an audience.
This morning, my youngest son, Cal, almost burned to death in his house. Comes from the kind of Scottish, English, tough, individualistic, independent background, and who was also a survivor of cancer, is his Jones husband, and who has been married to me this year for 37 years. That's not bad when you consider that she defines our marriage as a mutual relationship in which I am expected to be the mute. But let me tell you that despite having said that, my goodness, are you taking a picture of me? Come on up forward and roll it, Tommy. This is the first time in 25 years anybody said, please come up, sir, and do your... She said, I thought it was the greatest compliment I'd ever been paid as a woman. And I would have been unhesitatingly delighted to date you at any stage again had you asked me. I could have killed her. I mean, any idea how many years? But what it pointed out to me is that our great fear of feedback is predicated on those...
An audience and a speaker in teamwork together is to find the future, to will the way to better options, better alternatives. I believe the world is filled with problems, but solutions are there as well. And the job of the audience with the speaker is to find creative options.